Hi beautiful souls, welcome back to my channel. Today's video I'm going to be talking about my most used decks of 2024. I know this video is a little bit late, but honestly the only thing I can blame it on is pregnancy brain, doing things a little bit slower than usual. So I'm sorry it's a little bit late going up, but we're going to be talking about my most used decks of 2024, and I finally have a portable filming setup that I can move to different places of my house that have better lighting. So hopefully this quality is a little bit better. It's still dreary and snowy around where I live. I feel like winter has just kind of started to get bad here, so the lighting's not going to be the best that it ever can be, but at least it's better than it was. So this list is not anything super precise, just because I had a very rough year last year. I suffered a pregnancy loss at the very beginning of the year, March. We were just kind of getting started with the year. And then towards the end of the year, in August, I found out I was pregnant again. So it's just been a whirlwind of different things. I didn't keep track of the decks I used in any kind of journaling situation or anything like that. So these decks are the ones that are standing out to me in my mind as the ones I used the most, that had some kind of impact on me, that was memorable, I suppose. Now, I will say that I used a lot of my collection this year. I feel like I would go pick out a tarot or an oracle deck from my collection that maybe I don't use all the time, and I would use it for a reading or two, and then I would put it back. So there were quite a few decks that I used from my collection, and these ones are more of the ones that I would use for an extended period of time over and over. And there's really not much on this list because I did not read my tarot cards as much as I have in years past, just because of everything going on, which I feel like that is definitely changing this year. I find myself going to the cards for comfort and things more so than I did last year, because it would just kind of cause me a lot of more anxiety and things last year if, just with everything else going on. So yeah, without further ado, we're going to talk about my most used decks, and I hope you enjoy. Okay, first one I want to talk about, these aren't really in any particular order, but the first one I want to talk about is the Desert Illuminations Tarot. I love this deck. Also, I want to say, if you can hear my pellet stove, I hope it's not too loud, but it's cold in here, so I have to have it on. But anyways, I am sort of interested in getting the mass market version, just because this deck does not come with a guidebook. It comes with a tiny little pamphlet that kind of talks about a few keywords and things for the majors, but I would like to see a little bit more from a guidebook on this deck. But I do have the indie version, which is now no longer available. This one does have these orange backs with the white borders. I love this deck. I went through a period of time, I feel like kind of towards the beginning of the year, where I was using this deck quite a bit. This deck is a very clear reader, very clear. And it doesn't let me down, I know exactly what it's trying to tell me. It's scarily accurate. Sometimes it'll make me laugh with how accurate the cards are to whatever I'm going through. And it's funny because it'll be like if I'm anxious, then I'll get the Nine of Swords, and I'm like, why am I having this anxiety? And I get the Nine of Swords, and I'm like, yeah, I know that I'm anxious. It's a very clear reader in that way. But I love this deck. I really do. And I paired it with a lot of different decks this year. I have the Cowgirls and Aliens that I purchased last year, which was fun to use this with, as well as the Pathfinder's Oracle, which kind of feels deserty to me, and so I used it with that as well. But I feel like towards the last half of this past year, I didn't really use this one, but it definitely got a lot of use in the first half of 2024. And a lot of these decks, when I was using them, they were the only tarot decks I was using for an extended period of time, and that's the case with this one. It was out on my altar space, and so it was the main deck I was using for a large chunk of time. And I feel like what I've learned through this past year and the decks that I was using is that I kind of go back to the same things over and over. And so I feel like I'm going to take a critical look at my collection and really pay attention to what's important, you know. I've already kind of reorganized my decks for this new year. But I'll just be interested to see what I use in 2025, especially with the baby coming and things, what kind of main decks I reach for. Okay, let's talk about an oracle. I only have a few here, so let's switch it up. This is the Claves Astrologicae de Iris Sacra. This is an astrological deck. I went through a large period of time during 2024 where I was studying astrology and just really interested in astrology, and I got this deck, I believe, for my birthday in May, so I've had it since then, and I use this deck quite a bit. It has the houses, it has moon phases, and then it has the signs and the planets. And I really wanted a deck that didn't have any keywords on it so that I could kind of maybe get something out of a book, or like even this little pamphlet here is really helpful. And it, for some of them, has questions of, you know, things that you can journal about. And it has really concise little meanings that I was really into using when I use this deck. And it helped me to just kind of learn a little bit more about some of the basic associations with all of these different planets and signs and houses. The houses actually have the little keyword here, but everything else does not have any kind of keyword. It's just the subject we're talking about. And I really liked that for placeholders for ritual, or for, you know, the full and new moons that I would do readings on sometimes. Not as much as I wanted to, but I really enjoy this deck for what it is, and would love to one day have enough knowledge to be able to use this very accurately and well without doing any kind of additional reading while I pull the card. So it's one of the only decks I still have out in my desk space where I'm keeping decks that I might want to rotate into my current reading decks, because I wanted one astrology deck, and I feel like this is the one that I would use the most. And yes, so that is that little indie deck. It's kind of expensive for what it is. It's really small. I do like the size of it, but I'm sure I had a hard time finding it, but I'm sure there are other decks out there that have just the signs and, you know, the planets without keywords. Somewhere, if you guys know any, please suggest, because this is quite expensive for what it is, and I don't necessarily recommend it. I feel like you could even make like, flashcards or something for, the price you pay for this tiny little deck. So anyways, that was that. Let's talk tarot again. This is the Steampunk Tarot. Oh my goodness. I also received this for my birthday, and this deck, I feel like a lot of the love affairs I have with my tarot decks are ones that, like my all-time favorites are ones that when I got, it wasn't necessarily like an instant, I started working with it and loved it. This one sat for a little bit, and then it became something I was using like every single day, and it is so good. It's also very accurate as well. Those are the backs. It's very to the point, which I love, and I feel like maybe that's kind of the theme I was going for this year. Well, not necessarily. My other three tarot decks that I'm going to talk about were more of a comfort thing for me, but this deck's just to the point, and it's scarily accurate. Again, like I was asking about why the electricity went out, and I got a card that had like electricity in it. It was really funny. So yes, and this deck is older, but just because it's older doesn't mean it's not really, really good. I love the black borders on it. I would love to edge it one day. And I found myself reading a lot of books that kind of had this steampunk feel to them, and using this deck at that same time was just really immersive for me, and I loved that. But this deck's just really good. This is one that if you want something a little bit different, if steampunk kind of alternative style is something that you enjoy, then I think that this is a really good deck to have. It's RWS, but sometimes it can go its own way a little bit. It's easy to read without any kind of additional guidebook if you know the RWS, but something I really enjoyed with this deck was the guidebook by Barbara Moore. The writing in it is really good. It doesn't skew like too nice or like too harsh when you're doing readings. It just kind of seems like it gives you, how do I say this? Whenever you're reading, especially the guidebook entries, this deck, it gives you like steps to move forward, things to do as far as like changing a mindset around something, or I don't know, it just feels more hopeful as far as, yeah, maybe you pulled the Tower card, but you can go forth from here type of a thing, if that makes any sense. But I just love the aesthetic of this personally. My house has a little bit of steampunk vibes. I have a lot of like industrial style like light fixtures and things, and I incorporated that into my decor, so I love this. I really love this. And I love the feel of like this time frame. Like this is very much something, I wish I could live in sometimes. Like it's, there's machinery, so there's some modern elements, but it's not the world we live in now. And I love movies that feel steampunk, like, I don't know, Sherlock Holmes with Robert Downey Jr., things like that. I believe this is the card I got when I was asking about an electrical question, which is just so funny. And I love when decks are so, like, accurate like that, and the artwork matches up with what you're asking about. I really like that. So, that was the Steampunk Tarot. I have it in this little bag with a crystal. And it's by Llewellyn Publishing, so it's that smaller kind of cardstock. Really easy to shuffle and beautiful to handle. So, love this deck. Okay, I guess we'll talk about Oracle again. This is the Between the Worlds deck. I believe I got this for Christmas last year, so like 2023, yeah. And this is one that was, it, again, it wasn't an instant love affair. I actually modified this deck shortly after I got it, and I didn't love my modification. Now I don't mind it so much, but you know, I've seen other people who have this deck that have done a much better, more beautiful modification. But I don't mind mine now. This deck is really, really good. I've been really loving, for some reason lately, smaller little decks like this that just feel like you can throw them in a bag or throw them, you know, in your purse or just take them with you, and they're super portable. I don't know why, but I've been really into that lately. This has, you know, the premise of the deck is shadow casting with Bone and Curio oracle cards. So these are like meant to be items that you can bone cast with. So we have Coyote Tooth. And then each card has very like opposite keywords. So we have kind of the shadow and the light meaning. So we have deception and strategy for Coyote Tooth, wisdom and folly for Oakwood, growth and decay for Acorn, legacy and loss for Antique Coin. So you can use this with like upright and reverse meanings if that's how you read, or like when I have used this deck and I've just worked with the keywords, which is not my favorite way to work with it, but when I do that, I feel like looking at the reading or feeling the energy of the situation I'm asking about, I can kind of gauge which one we're looking at. And usually if, you know, you are looking at one concept, you can still bring in the other one, because it's like, well, you know, I need to access this, but there's this block here, or, you know, what's blocking me from this access. So it's interesting to look at both. Both the shadow and the light. You know, the little mod I did, it's starting to grow on me. I don't hate it. I used a red pen that matches the font and everything. Okay, but the way I use this deck that I really adore is this guidebook. So let's look at CAR, which is number 2, Activity and Stasis. So there's a whole bunch of like write-ups and stuff in here. And, you know, the main things I would look at here were obviously the keywords, which are on the deck now. And then I would look at the message. So it says all vehicles are only as good as the care, intention, or purpose fueling them. But the thing that I love, love, love about this guidebook is the reflection questions right here. And there are so many for each card. And, you know, there's also this advice here for upright and reversed, which I haven't worked with a ton, I'll be honest with you guys, because to me, the shining star of this deck has been the journaling aspect of it for me, which is looking at these reflection questions and picking one that just popped out to me. So there are 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7 questions for each card. And I would love to use this when I wanted to do a reading, but I didn't necessarily want to do a reading that was like predictive or asking about like a specific situation, but I still wanted to use my cards and do a reflection and journal. So this is a perfect deck for that. And yes, sometimes the card I would pull would correlate with something I was going through, but a lot of times it was just like giving me a prompt or something to think about that kind of didn't have anything to do with what I was currently going through, which was a really nice exercise for me. So I'll read you guys some of the questions. It says, can you recall times when you wanted to get into a vehicle and just leave? How is your temperament on the road with other drivers? So, you know, there's a variety of questions here. If you own a car or even if you rent, do you keep it neat or messy in the interior? Do you use maps and plan trips, or do you like to see what will occur? Can you replicate adventure without traveling or changing residences? How do you feel when you return from a vacation? What does letting go of a wheel when driving mean to you metaphorically? So there is a plethora of different kinds of questions here that are really awesome, I think, to reflect. And, you know, this can be a form of shadow work. Like, to me, the one that stuck out to me was, if you own a car or even if you rent, do you keep it neat or messy in the interior? And I kind of have a tendency to have messy interior of my car. So I would probably pick that question, just like, you know, going off of this right now. And then what I would do when I was using this deck is I would pull like an additional tarot card, like, okay, trying to dig into why do I tend to have more of a messy interior of my car? And I would pull a tarot card and reflect on that, which was a really beautiful practice. I still have it in my little reading bin for, you know, decks I want to rotate through, which is kind of a small little bin and collection I have going on right now. So I might make a video that shows what I have in my bin right now. So yeah, but I really love this deck and really recommend it. If, you know, it's a very versatile deck and there's a lot to dig into, which I love oracle decks that you can use for personal use, but you can also whip it out if you want to just do, like, you know, a predictive reading. I've used this in my like Tarot Unsolved tarot readings as well, so really, really good one. Okay, let's talk about this little like duo that I have. This is the box I keep these decks in together, and we have the Mists of Avalon Oracle and the Druidcraft Tarot. So Druidcraft Tarot is one of my favorite tarot decks of all time. I have used this deck quite a bit this year. I've used it in client readings. I used it with other oracle decks. But if I am using this oracle deck, the only tarot deck I use it with is the Druidcraft. These are a match made in heaven. This deck is just so good. And I kind of keep it away a lot of the times because I only bring this out when I need like something I know is going to work like 100% of the time. This is a deck I only ever use for myself. It is very sacred to me in that way. I don't use it for clients. Each deck has 4 keywords kind of around the corners here or around the sides. And it's not a very big deck. I think it's like probably 36 cards around there. So that's another reason I don't use it all of the time, because there's not an unlimited amount of cards here. But anytime I have used this, the write-up in the guidebook is just so on par with what I am going through. It's honestly so scary how accurate this is. And it always like nourishes my soul and makes me feel better with whatever I'm going through. And so I absolutely adore that. So this was a deck that I used. There was a period of time after my loss that I suffered that I used this and the Druidcraft together, and it was really healing and helpful for me. And recently, going through some hard stuff just with pregnancy, I also pulled this out again and did some deep work with it. And it's just so good. It is so, so good. I love it. So it stays in that little box with the Druidcraft because that's the deck it belongs with. So that is the Mists of Avalon Oracle. This is a really underrated oracle. I feel like people don't talk about it enough, but it's really, really good. And then the Druidcraft, it pairs really well aesthetically. And this is just a really good deck. I color my hair red, like ginger red color, and there are a lot of redheads in this deck, so I was able to kind of see myself in a lot of the artwork this year when I was doing readings, which is really beautiful. And this deck is pretty comforting as well, I would say. I have this little guidebook that honestly was kind of the main thing I was using with it, but I also have the big giant guidebook as well because I have 2 copies of this deck. So yeah, but I just really love it. I love the, you know, the druid nature energy and theme of this deck. Beautiful. Okay. So use that pair quite a bit this year. All right, last 2 are going to be tarot decks. Let's talk about this one next. This is the Pagan Otherworlds, which is actually the deck I'm using currently. I just, several times a year, I use this deck as my main deck, and it's the only deck I use, and it's so good. And every time I use this deck, it's like, why do I have any other deck? You know, it is so beautiful aesthetically, like it just feels magical to bring it out. I've had it now for around 3 years, and I've used it so much. Shuffled the crap out of it, and it is in beautiful condition. It has beautiful beautiful durable linen cardstock. It's easy to shuffle, and there's just something so calming about the artwork and the way that the pips are portrayed specifically. This deck also feels like winter, which I enjoy, and is also a reason I have it out lately. But it's just so good. And this deck does skew kind of like nicer to me. When I do readings, I feel like it's comforting and supportive and constructive, I guess. It's really good. And there's no guide. There is a guidebook for this deck. I don't have it. I've never felt like I needed one. It speaks to me very clearly. And when I go through periods of time, which is something I've been dealing with lately, and the past few years, honestly, is wanting more of a simple life as far as like my things, and not wanting to fall into like consumerism traps anymore, and just wanting to get down to basics of things that I really truly love. So this deck for me is really, really good with work surrounding that, and surrounding being grateful and having gratitude for things I already have. The artwork has kind of this barren yet warm imagery to it. Like the Four of Swords here, it's very desolate, but then you see this little house in the distance, this cozy little cottage, right? And I just love that so much. I love that so much. This deck is so good. And you know, there's it's all outside, you know, in nature. So very pagan. And it just, I love that. It makes me feel like a minimalist. And if I ever was a true minimalist, this would probably be the perfect deck for that. So, love Pagan Otherworlds. I could talk about it all day. I don't think it's for everyone. I know some people have it, and it is an indie deck, so it's expensive. You know, more expensive than a mass market deck. So if you don't resonate with the artwork, I wouldn't recommend it. You know, these are all very personal experiences to me and my relationship with the cards. So just take that into consideration. But last but not least, my most used deck this year was the Haptic Tarot. And I love this deck. I had like such this annoying kind of calling to purchase this deck. Like it was kind of I was like, I just don't understand why I keep getting pulled to this deck. And when I got it in, I understood. This is one that, from the moment I got it in, I did have a love affair with it, and I used it for 3 months straight, as pretty much the only deck I was using for 3 months straight. So out of the whole year, that is a lot of time for me to be using one deck. And, you know, within just the grand scheme of how much I really used tarot last year, this takes the cake by far of most used deck. So this deck is used or is made with AI, but it was with the help of AI, from what I understand. The artist then kind of manipulated the images to fit what he wanted them to look like a little bit more. And I, as a whole, do not agree with AI. It's not something I personally, like, it scares me, to be honest. And I guess some of my fear with, I don't really have a plan to ever really purchase any other AI decks. This one just really spoke to me and like was calling to me, especially because it's haptic and it's to do with touch and the hands, which is like a big part of my life and something I love. So I was kind of afraid with an AI deck that you would kind of feel the energy of like all the other artwork or artists that were put into this artwork, if that makes any sense, and that the messages would be cluttered or they wouldn't be clear because you're getting so many different energies at once. But what I found with this deck was that it feels like the artist's deck. I feel like his vision is very clear in this, and the little guidebook that comes with this is also so amazing and so concise and beautiful. And this deck has a lot of depth, which I feel like some people have complained that it doesn't, because the artwork is not super filled with symbolism and it can be a little bit simple. But I think that this deck has a lot of depth to it. And wow. Just wow. I love this. It is, again, it kind of gives me a similar vibe to the Pagan Otherworlds as far as that kind of minimalistic artwork that just is so profound to me, and I love it. And this deck was very comforting and supportive to me, and I loved the little write-ups in the guidebook, and I used those every time I would read with this deck. And it's also just so beautiful. It's also easy to shuffle, even though it's like the size of an oracle deck. I love the backs. They are so gorgeous to me. I love that color of green. And the artwork is just so pleasing to look at. You know, I have the Revival Art Tarot and some other decks that I like. This is what I wanted when I got those decks. Gosh. It is so beautiful. I love that there's this darkness. It's very, the colors are just so pleasing to me. But it's just the energy and the vibe I get from this deck and the readings I get from it. And again, very personal to me. I don't think that this deck would work for everybody, but it works for me. So beautiful, luscious, matte cardstock. So I appreciate that the creator made this deck a tactile a pleasing tactile experience. And the cards aren't necessarily like straight up RWS when you look at the imagery. You kind of have to look at it a little bit differently and from a different perspective, which I like, but it's still close enough, and the meanings in the guidebook make enough sense that it's just really good. I love this. so many profound readings. It was very reassuring to me in the beginning of my pregnancy because I was like worried that things were going to go wrong again, and this deck was very accurate in predicting that everything was going to be fine. So love this deck. So good. I love the kind of creamy borders. It's just everything. Okay, so those are my most used decks of 2024. I didn't have many, and I feel like the theme of only using a small handful of decks is probably going to continue to be true for me. Just at this point in my life, and just my goals and things that I want, and the peace that I wish to have around stuff in my possession is very much this energy of only using the few things that I like. And, you know, I could never only have one tarot deck and one oracle deck or whatever, just because I do like to change it up. But having a small selection, I think, is kind of where it's at for me. And so I have, again, reorganized my decks into bins for some different categories, and put a bunch of decks away that I need to evaluate of more that I'm going to sell and things like that. But for now, I'm happy with where I'm at with my collection and what I'm using on a daily basis. And I don't feel the need to go out and buy a bunch of more items right now. I'm in a very grateful place and feel like I have enough at this point in time, which I'm grateful to say. But anyways, I hope you guys enjoyed this. If you want to purchase any of my decks that I'm getting rid of, I have them in my Etsy shop. There's a few out of print decks on there, and I think there's really only a few decks left, but I will be adding some more soon, so keep an eye out for that. But yeah, I love you guys so much, and I'll see you in my next video. Bye.